In 2014, a female couple adopted 6 black children from the foster care system, an act hailed as a triumph of compassion. They created a picture-perfect family in their stunning home. But when the children vanished 4 years later, their SUV was found smashed at the foot of a California cliff, a discovery that would unravel a story of unimaginable cruelty hidden behind a flawless, curated lie. Before we begin, thank you for being here. This is a story about the monsters that can hide behind the most benevolent masks, and it is a difficult one to tell. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what this story brings up for you. It's important to know we're in this together, trying to make sense of the darkness. Now, let me tell you what really happened. The air in the Orangeburg County Social Services office in the fall of 2014 was stale and smelled of weak coffee, wet wool, and quiet desperation. It was a place of beige walls, flickering fluorescent lights, and case files stacked so high they threatened to avalanche onto the worn linoleum floors. In the center of this sterile, hopeless room sat the Holloway siblings, a small, terrified island of humanity adrift in a sea of bureaucracy. They were a constellation of needs, a family held together by the fragile, fierce gravity of their love for one another. At 16, Xavier was their unwilling patriarch. His jaw was set with a defiant tension, his dark eyes scanning the room, missing nothing. He watched the adults, his mind a cold calculator of threat and safety. He had been a parent for so long that he had forgotten how to be a child. His hand rested on the back of his sister Amara's chair. At 15, Amara was the family's peacemaker, a gentle, intelligent girl who had learned early that compliance was the safest path through the chaotic world of foster care. She clutched a worn paperback, her knuckles white, her gaze fixed on the floor. Across from them, 12-year-old Caleb was lost in his own world, his pencil flying across the pages of a sketchbook. He was the dreamer, the artist, a boy who processed his fear and confusion by transforming it into fantastical creatures and superheroes on the page. Beside him, 11-year-old Nia, the truth-teller, watched the adults with a sharp, analytical curiosity. She was the one who asked the questions no one else dared to, her mind always working, always trying to make sense of a world that rarely did. And huddled together on a small bench were the twins, Jeremiah and Jordan, both 8. They were the innocents, 2 halves of a whole, their bright, easy smiles the last, flickering remnants of a childhood that had been stolen from them. Their social worker, Diane Warren, was a woman drowning in her own caseload. She looked at the 6 children, a beautiful, impossible puzzle, and felt the familiar, crushing weight of failure. Originally from Washington State, the siblings had been moved to this specialized group home in South Carolina after a series of failed placements, a last-ditch effort by the system to keep them together. Her supervisor had been clear: no more extensions, Diane. Find 6 beds by the end of the day, or the state splits them up. It's not personal, it's math. She had just spent an hour on the phone with their last foster mother, who was in tears. I love them, Diane, I do, the woman had sobbed. But Xavier, he's a good boy, but he's angry. And the twins need so much attention. I can't do it. I can't be what they need. Just as Diane was steeling herself to deliver the devastating news, a miracle appeared. The door to the conference room opened, and Jennifer and Sarah Davis entered, filling the drab, hopeless space with an aura of calm, expensive confidence. Jennifer, a charismatic woman in her late 30s with a bright, engaging smile, was a former mommy blogger who had built a significant social media following with her posts about conscious, compassionate parenting. She was the public face, the storyteller. Beside her, her wife, Sarah, was the quieter, more intense of the two. A former family therapist, she projected an air of thoughtful, professional competence. They were, according to their file, perfect. A wealthy, stable couple with a beautiful, sprawling home in the children's home state of Washington. They were specifically looking to adopt a large, high-needs sibling group. They hadn't shied away from the Holloway file, with its thick reports of trauma and neglect. We see their history not as a liability, but as a roadmap, Sarah had explained to Diane in their initial meeting, her voice the calm, measured tone of a seasoned therapist. It shows us where the hurt is. It shows us where to begin the work. And it would be our honor to bring them home, back to Washington where they belong. To Diane Warren, a woman desperate for a happy ending in a job that rarely provided one. They were an answer to a prayer. She championed their application, pushing it through the system, defending her decision to skeptical supervisors who saw only the potential for a culture clash. This is what we hoped for, Diane had argued. A family with the resources, the training, and the desire to take on a case like this. It's a miracle. The adoption was finalized. The day the children left with their new mothers was a study in quiet tension. Jennifer was already curating the moment, taking photos with her phone, her smile wide and performative. "Our forever family begins now," she had declared, her voice a little too loud for the small, sterile room. Xavier watched her, his eyes narrowed. He saw the way her smile didn't reach her eyes, the way her hand on Jordan's shoulder was more of a placement than a caress. He saw Sarah watching them all with a cool, analytical gaze, like a scientist observing a new set of specimens. These women didn't see children, they saw a project. He felt a cold knot of dread in his stomach, but he said nothing. He had learned long ago that his voice didn't matter. His job was to keep his family together, and if that meant walking into a new, uncertain danger, he would do it. The first Instagram post went up before they had even left the state. It was a picture of the 6 children, smiling awkwardly in the back of the SUV. The caption, written by Jennifer, was a masterpiece of curated compassion, the beginning of our greatest adventure. It won't be easy, but love makes everything possible. So blessed to finally have our tribe. Hashtag Davis Tribe, hashtag adopted with love, hashtag forever family. The post garnered thousands of likes within the hour. The world saw a beautiful story, a flawless composition of hope and redemption. They did not see the fear in the children's eyes. They did not see the cold, proprietary glint in their new mother's smiles. That first night, the children were shown to a large, single room on the 2nd floor of the farmhouse. It was beautiful, clean, and completely impersonal, with 6 identical beds lined up like a dormitory. Jennifer and Sarah wished them a cheerful good night and closed the door, leaving them alone in the vast, echoing silence of the house. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, Xavier quietly pushed his bed against the door. The others followed his lead, dragging their own beds across the floor until all 6 were huddled together in the center of the room, a small, makeshift island in a sea of sterile perfection. They didn't speak. They just lay there in the dark, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house, drawing comfort from the simple, familiar warmth of each other. The house on the isolated farm was not a sanctuary. It was a stage, and the final, horrifying act was about to begin. The Davis family home was a sprawling, modern farmhouse on a remote, 20-acre plot in rural Washington, an hour's drive from the nearest town. It was a place of immense natural beauty, surrounded by towering pines and rolling green hills. To the outside world, and to Jennifer's thousands of social media followers, it was an idyllic paradise, a perfect place to heal wounded children. But behind the picturesque facade, the house was a prison of systematic, psychological abuse, a place where compassion was a performance and cruelty was a carefully guarded secret. The smiling photos Jennifer posted online were meticulously staged productions. One Saturday, she decided they would bake cookies. The scene was set perfectly. The gleaming, state-of-the-art kitchen, the 6 children in matching aprons, bowls of flour and chocolate chips artfully arranged. "Okay, everyone, big smiles," she chirped, holding up her phone. The twins, Jeremiah and Jordan, managed weak, hungry smiles. Xavier stared at the camera, his expression a blank wall. "Xavier, honey, we've talked about this," Jennifer said, her voice dropping, the cheerful tone replaced by a sharp, cold edge. "Happy faces. We are a happy family." He forced a smile. The picture was perfect. The caption was a long, emotional post about finding joy in the simple things. The world did not see that the cookies were props, that the children, their stomachs aching with hunger, were allowed only one each before the rest were thrown away, a lesson in moderation and self-control. The architect of this hidden world of cruelty was Sarah Davis. The former family therapist used her professional knowledge not to heal, but to control, to manipulate, and to break the children's spirits. Her methods were insidious, a constant, low-grade psychological warfare that was impossible for a child to fight. She framed their abuse in the chilling, detached language of therapy. Food was her primary weapon. The children were kept on a near-starvation diet, their meals consisting of small, precisely measured portions of bland, nutrient-poor food. Sarah called it a therapeutic diet designed to detoxify their bodies from the years of poor nutrition they had endured in foster care. In reality, it was a tool of control. A hungry child is a compliant child. The gnawing, constant ache in their stomachs was a physical manifestation of their powerlessness. A typical dinner was a small bowl of steamed vegetables and a single slice of unbuttered bread. While the children ate in silence, Jennifer and Sarah would enjoy a full, rich meal, often with a glass of wine, explaining that it was important for the children to learn to manage their desires. Punishments were called consequence sessions. They were devised by Sarah to be psychologically devastating. One evening, Nia, the bright, curious 11-year-old, innocently asked, "Sarah, why is our food different from yours?" The question hung in the silent dining room. Sarah put down her fork and gave Nia a look of calm, clinical disappointment. "That's a very interesting question, Nia," she said. "It shows us that you're still operating from a place of scarcity and comparison, which is a common trauma response. We need to help you reframe that." After dinner, Nia was taken to the living room. Her consequence was to stand in a corner, facing the wall for 3 hours. "This is not a punishment," Sarah explained to the other children. "This is a quiet, reflective time for Nia to consider her relationship with food and gratitude." Xavier, as the oldest and the most defiant, bore the brunt of the abuse. He saw through their performance from the beginning. His resistance was not loud. It was a quiet, stubborn refusal to break. He would try to sneak extra food for the younger twins. He would take the blame for Nia's questions or Caleb's transgressions. This defiance was met with a different kind of consequence. Sarah would diagnose him with oppositional defiant disorder, and his punishments would be physical. He would be sent to his room, where Jennifer, her own narcissistic rage ignited by his refusal to comply with her perfect family narrative, would beat him with a belt, the sounds muffled by the thick, insulated walls of their beautiful, empty house. The next morning, his bruises would be explained to the other children as the result of his clumsiness and his inability to control his body. Amara, the gentle peacemaker, tried to navigate this world of terror by being perfect. She did her chores without being asked. She never complained. She encouraged her siblings to just be good, to just do what they were told, believing that if they could all just be perfect enough, they would finally earn the love of their new mothers. But her compliance only seemed to feed their cruelty. One afternoon, Sarah called Amara into her study for a check-in. "Amara," Sarah said, her voice soft and conspiratorial, "I know you're trying so hard, but I need you to be my helper. I need you to tell me when the others are breaking the rules. It's the only way we can help them heal." She was turning Amara's desire to please into a tool of surveillance, forcing her to choose between her siblings and the illusion of her mother's approval. The children were living in a psychological funhouse, a place where love was a performance, food was a weapon, and every normal childhood impulse was diagnosed as a symptom of a deep-seated pathology. Their past trauma was not being healed. It was being used against them, twisted into a justification for their present torment. They were more trapped on this beautiful, isolated farm than they had ever been in the broken, chaotic world of the foster care system. At least there, they had each other. Here, they were being systematically, scientifically broken apart. The only person in the world who saw the cracks in the Devise's perfect facade was their next-door neighbor, Dana Rosales. A no-nonsense, observant single mother who worked from home as a medical transcriptionist, Dana had a clear view of the Devise's yard from her office window. She had been cautiously optimistic when the big, seemingly happy family moved in. A week after they arrived, she had baked a welcome basket of muffins and brought it over. Jennifer had answered the door, her smile bright but strained. "How thoughtful," she'd said, but she made no move to invite Dana inside. "We're in a very delicate transition period right now. Sarah and I are creating a very structured, calm environment. We can't have any outside disruptions." The message was clear: stay away. From that day on, Dana watched. The children she saw in the yard were not the vibrant, smiling kids from Jennifer's Instagram posts. They were pale, thin, and moved with the furtive, watchful anxiety of stray animals. They rarely played. They mostly performed chores, their small bodies moving with a slow, joyless efficiency. She would hear Jennifer's voice, sharp and commanding, calling them from the house, and would see them flinch. One afternoon, she saw one of the little twins, Jordan, standing by the fence that separated their properties. Dana smiled and held up a cookie she was eating. "Want one, sweetie?" she asked gently. The boy's eyes went wide with a look of pure, animal terror. He looked back at the house, then back at her, shook his head violently, and ran back inside as if she had offered him poison. The first alarm bell rang one night about a year after they moved in. Dana was working late when she saw movement by her trash cans. It was Xavier. He was silently, desperately, digging through her garbage, pulling out discarded food scraps and stuffing them into his pockets. The sight of the proud, stoic teenage boy, so hungry that he was reduced to eating her family's trash, was a physical blow. The next morning, Dana made her first call to Child Protective Services. She described what she had seen, her voice tight with a mixture of anger and concern. A week later, a CPS caseworker made a scheduled visit to the Davis home. Jennifer and Sarah were ready. They were the picture of calm, compassionate concern. They explained to the caseworker that Xavier had deep-seated food insecurity issues from his time in foster care, and that his foraging behavior was a known trauma response they were working on with him in therapy. They portrayed Dana as a well-meaning but meddling, possibly homophobic neighbor who didn't understand the complexities of therapeutic parenting. The caseworker, faced with two articulate professional women and a file full of Sarah's expert documentation, accepted their story completely. The case was closed. Dana made 3 more calls over the next 2 years. Each time, the story was the same. She would report something she had seen: the children looking thinner, a bruise on Nia's arm, the sound of a child crying for hours on end. Each time, a caseworker would visit. Each time, Jennifer and Sarah would perform their roles perfectly, their lives wrapped in the unassailable language of therapy. They were the experts. Dana was just an emotional, interfering neighbor. The final, decisive act of isolation came after an incident at school. Nia, during a health class, had innocently asked her teacher, a young, perceptive woman named Ms. Albright, why some kids, even if they had a house, might not get enough food to eat. Ms. Albright was alarmed by the question and the look of fear in Nia's eyes when she asked it. She made a call to CPS. "I'm a mandated reporter," she told the social worker on the phone, "and I'm reporting what I believe to be severe nutritional neglect. The child is underweight, she's lethargic, and she's asking questions about starvation. You need to look into this." This time, the system, forced to act on a report from a teacher, opened a more formal investigation. Jennifer and Sarah, in a state of panicked, narcissistic rage, knew they were losing control. They could not risk the children being interviewed by professionals outside of their influence. That week, they pulled all 6 children from public school. Jennifer posted a long, emotional blog post, a masterpiece of manipulative prose, explaining their decision. She wrote of the systemic bullying and lack of understanding her children had faced in the public school system. She announced that they would be providing a safer, more tailored homeschooling environment, where the children's unique emotional needs could be met without judgment. Her followers praised her as a brave, devoted mother, a warrior protecting her children. The world saw a heroic act of love. But Dana Rosales, watching from her window as the school bus drove past the DeVise's house for the first time without stopping, knew what it really was. It was the final wall being built around the prison. The children were now completely, utterly alone with their captors. The final act of the Davis family tragedy began with a single, professional, and unavoidable phone call. The report from Nia's teacher, combined with the now documented pattern of calls from Dana Rosales, had finally triggered a more serious level of intervention from Child Protective Services. A new social worker, a more tenacious and experienced woman who was not so easily charmed, had been assigned to the case. After reviewing the file, she was alarmed. The pattern of reports, followed by the children's abrupt removal from school, was a massive red flag. She knew she couldn't just show up. A new, strict departmental policy, ironically put in place after a lawsuit from another wealthy family, required 24-hour notice for any home visit, even an emergency wellness check. It was a bureaucratic handcuff she despised, but she had to follow it. She left a message on the Devise's voicemail. Her tone was polite, professional, and unyielding. She informed them that due to the repeated reports, an unannounced home visit with a sheriff's deputy had been scheduled for the following day. The purpose of the visit, she stated clearly, was to interview each of the 6 children separately and privately. Jennifer and Sarah listened to the message, the social worker's calm, bureaucratic words a death knell to their carefully constructed world. The facade was about to crumble. They were not just facing the loss of the children. They were facing criminal charges, child endangerment, abuse, neglect. They were facing the complete, public, and humiliating destruction of the perfect image they had spent years cultivating. Their brand, their identity, their very sense of self was about to be exposed as a monstrous lie. That evening, they sat in the cold, sterile kitchen of their beautiful home, the silence thick with a panicked, narcissistic rage. "They're going to take them," Jennifer whispered, her voice trembling. "They're going to talk to them, and they're going to take them from us." "They won't just take them, Jen," Sarah said, her voice a low, chilling monotone. "They'll talk. Xavier will talk. Nia will talk. They will tell them everything. Our lives, our careers, everything we've built, it will be over." She looked at Jennifer, her eyes cold and clear. "There is no scenario where this ends well for us if those children talk to the police." The unspoken thought hung in the air between them. It was not a suicide pact born of despair. It was a final, horrifying act of control, a problem to be solved. They would not let the world see their failure. They would not let the children tell their stories. They would erase the evidence. And the evidence was their family. That night, they moved with a chilling, methodical speed. Sarah, the former therapist, went to the medicine cabinet. She crushed a large dose of a powerful antihistamine, Benadryl, into a sweet, fruity drink. Jennifer, the storyteller, woke the children. "Wake up, sleepy heads," she said, her voice a bright, brittle parody of excitement. "Surprise! We're going on a spontaneous family adventure. A road trip up the coast to California. We're going to see the giant trees." The children, groggy and confused, were terrified. Xavier knew, with a cold certainty, that this was not a vacation. He saw the wild, panicked look in Jennifer's eyes, the cold, resolute set of Sarah's jaw. This was an escape, but they weren't escaping with them. They were escaping from them. He tried to protest, to ask where they were going, but his words were met with a sharp, "Get in the car, Xavier." Now, they were herded into the family's large SUV, still in their pajamas. Sarah handed each of them a cup of the sweet, drug juice. "For the long drive," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. Amara, the gentle peacemaker, took a sip. It tasted strange, thick and bitter under the sweetness. She looked at her mothers, at the hard, set lines of their faces, and a cold fear, deeper than any she had ever known, washed over her. She saw Xavier watching them, his eyes narrowed, a silent, desperate question in his gaze. But it was too late. A heavy, unnatural sleepiness began to pull at her eyelids. The last thing she remembered was the rhythmic hum of the tires on the pavement, a sound that was both a lullaby and a funeral dirge. The drive south through the night was a silent, tense affair. Jennifer drove, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, her blood alcohol level steadily rising from the bottle of wine, she had concealed in the console. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead, her face a blank mask. Their flight was erratic, a meandering descent into madness. Jennifer would drive for hours, then pull over at a deserted rest stop, sleeping for an hour before getting back on the road, taking back roads and getting lost, all to avoid any potential police alerts. In the back, the children, one by one, succumbed to the sedatives, their heads lolling against the windows, their fear finally giving way to a deep, unnatural sleep. It took them nearly 3 days to reach the rugged, dramatic coastline of Mendocino County, California, a place of breathtaking beauty and treacherous 100-foot cliffs. This was the place, the end of the road, the final act of their story. The first person to find them was a tourist, a woman from Germany on a dream vacation to see the California coast. She was hiking a scenic trail along the cliffs of Mendocino County, the Pacific Ocean a churning, majestic expanse of blue and white below her. She paused to take a photograph and saw something on the rocks at the bottom of the cliff, a dark, unnatural shape being battered by the relentless surf. It was the wreckage of an SUV. The scene that unfolded was one of horrific, chaotic discovery. The Mendocino County Sheriff's Office was called, and the case landed on the desk of Detective Miles Corbin. Corbin was a seasoned, weary investigator, a man who had seen the worst that people could do to each other, but nothing could have prepared him for this. The recovery was a difficult, dangerous operation. A team had to rappel down the sheer cliff face. The bodies of Jennifer and Sarah Davis were found in the front seats, their deaths instantaneous. The bodies of 3 of the children, Amara, Jeremiah, and Jordan, were also recovered, 2 from inside the vehicle, 1 from the churning water nearby. But 3 of the children, Xavier, Caleb, and Nia, were missing, their seats in the back of the SUV empty. Initially, it was treated as a tragic, horrific accident. A tired driver, a dark and winding road, a moment of inattention. But as Detective Corbin stood at the edge of the cliff, looking down at the mangled wreckage, the details began to bother him. He spoke to the first deputy on the scene. "Any skid marks?" Corbin asked. "No, sir," the deputy replied. "None. The ground is soft from the rain. A car going that fast would have left a trench. It's like it just floated off. This car hadn't skidded. It had driven." Corbin ordered his team to retrieve the SUV's onboard data recorder, the vehicle's black box. In the forensics lab a day later, he watched as a technician downloaded the data. The screen showed a timeline of the vehicle's last moments. "Here's where it gets weird, Detective," the technician said, pointing to the screen. The vehicle was stopped at that scenic pullout for over 7 minutes. Then, at 3:14 a.m., the accelerator was pushed to the floor. Full throttle. It went from 0 to 60 in about 8 seconds, straight over the edge. This was not an accident. It was a deliberate act. The toxicology reports came back a few days later, and they confirmed Corbin's growing suspicion. The 3 children found at the scene all had toxic, incapacitating levels of diphenhydramine, the active ingredient in Benadryl, in their systems. They had been drugged into a state of unconsciousness before the crash. Jennifer, the driver, had a blood alcohol level well over the legal limit. Sarah, in the passenger seat, was completely clean. She had been sober, a willing, conscious participant in the final, murderous act. This was no accident. This was a calculated, cold-blooded mass murder-suicide. The search for the 3 missing children became a grim, desperate race against the tide. Corbin knew they were not runaways. They were in the water, somewhere, victims of the same horrifying act as their siblings. The case was now a complex, multi-state investigation. Corbin's team began to dig into the lives of Jennifer and Sarah Davis, and the perfect, curated image they had presented to the world began to unravel with terrifying speed. Detective Miles Corbin's investigation became a meticulous, heartbreaking excavation of a hidden world of abuse. He contacted the authorities in Washington state and learned of the history of ignored CPS reports. He found Dana Rosales, the neighbor, whose tearful, angry testimony provided the crucial context of the long-term starvation and cruelty. She described the thin, terrified children, the stark contrast between the smiling photos online and the grim reality she witnessed every day. "I called them," she told Corbin, her voice thick with guilt and rage. "I called them so many times. I told them those kids were starving. I told them something was wrong, but they wouldn't listen. They believed the mommy blogger and the therapist. They always believed the ones with the perfect story." The story exploded in the media. The public, who had once lauded Jennifer Davis as a parenting guru, turned on her with a vicious fury. Her old blog posts and Instagram photos were flooded with millions of angry comments. Hashtags like hashtag Justice for the Holloways and hashtag Davis Tribe of Horrors trended for weeks. The public that had consumed her perfect family narrative now consumed the story of her monstrous betrayal with the same voracious appetite. Corbin's team executed a search warrant on the DeVese's abandoned farmhouse. The house was clean, sterile, almost empty, as if it had been scrubbed of all life. But in Caleb's room, hidden under a loose floorboard, they found his secret. It was a stack of his sketchbooks. The drawings were a silent, devastating diary of their torment. The early pages were filled with the hopeful, fantastical creatures of a child's imagination. But as the months went on, the drawings became darker, more allegorical. There were pictures of small, stick-like figures with empty bowls, surrounded by mountains of food they couldn't reach. There were drawings of two smiling, queen-like figures with sharp teeth, locking small birds in cages. The final drawing was the most haunting. It depicted 6 small birds, finally breaking free from their cage, flying out over a vast, dark ocean. It was a child's dream of escape, a dream that had been realized in the most horrifying way imaginable. Over the next few weeks, the ocean gave up the last of its secrets. The bodies of the remaining 3 children were found, washed ashore miles apart by the relentless tide. The full scope of the tragedy was finally, horribly, complete. The final scene of this tragedy does not take place in a courtroom, for the perpetrators had already executed their own brutal judgment. It takes place on that windy, beautiful, and terrible stretch of the Mendocino County coastline. Detective Miles Corbin stands at the cliff edge, the spot where the SUV's tires had left their final, faint impression in the soft earth. He looks down at the churning, indifferent Pacific, the waves crashing against the rocks 100 feet below. He reconstructs the final moments in his mind. He sees the SUV, parked in the darkness, the drugged, sleeping children in the back. He sees Sarah, sober and resolute, looking at her wife. He sees Jennifer, her face illuminated by the dashboard lights, taking a final, long drink from the wine bottle before turning the key in the ignition. He sees the moment of decision, the foot pressing down on the accelerator, the vehicle lurching forward, not in a skid, not in a moment of panic, but in a final, deliberate act of control. He thinks about the sheer, breathtaking narcissism of it all, the need to control the narrative so completely that murder becomes preferable to public shame. He thinks of the children, of Xavier's fierce, protective spirit, of Amara's gentle heart, of Nia's bright curiosity, of the twins' innocent smiles. He thinks of the system that failed them, of the social workers who were too overworked to see the truth, of the public that was too eager to believe in a beautiful lie. He thinks of Dana Rosales, the neighbor who tried to sound the alarm, her voice a Cassandra cry that no one would heed. And he thinks of Caleb's last drawing, the 6 small birds flying free. He looks out at the vast, empty sky, and he knows that the only freedom they ever found was in the cold, dark waters of the Pacific. The world had failed them. The system had failed them. And the 2 women who had promised them a forever family had given them only a final, terrifying end.